that's sort of the irony here. During the sort of between Election Day of 2020 and the January 6th insurrection, and there was this great fear inside Fox that its new competitors on cable, much smaller, chief among them Newsmax and then secondarily OAN, that they were going to lose their viewers.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, what Fox stands to lose and gain in 2024. As the Republican Party begins to decide how it feels about a third White House run by Donald Trump, Fox News remains a major player in how the next campaign will shake out. But the defamation lawsuits against the cable news behemoth have helped uncover the distance between Fox's interest in appeasing its viewers with conspiracy theories and outright falsehoods, and what its top talent and ownership have been saying behind the scenes since the 2020 campaign. New York Times reporter Jim Rutenberg has been covering Fox and the Murdochs for years. His latest New York Times Magazine story is called How Fox Chased Its Audience Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's my conversation with Jim Rutenberg. So much of the problems at Fox, it seems to me, boiled down to the separation between the news side and the opinion side of the programming. What makes Fox unique in this respect?
Well, really what has happened over time is that Fox News, when it started, they made a real point of building a news division out, having a big, robust Washington bureau. They hired reporters from NPR, from the Associated Press, people with track records of covering Washington in a straight way. Their story angles were more from the center-right than other media. That was kind of the point, though they never liked to say it that way. They called it their fair and balanced. That was sort of code for that. But it was rooted in verified facts, and then they had opinion at night. And in the earlier days, some of that opinion was a show, for instance, called Hannity and Combs. It was Sean Hannity and a liberal counterpart called Alan Combs. And the joke at the time was always, well, Hannity always won the fight. It felt very skewed. But nonetheless, it had a claim to a right-left kind of debate. Over time, that fell away, and it became just Hannity. Over time, the network dropped the fair and balanced tagline. Over time, opinion programming took over a bit more of its schedule. And lastly, over time, its prime time became far more purely sort of pro-Trump personalities. Maybe here or there, Tucker Carlson would criticize the president. More often than not, though, he would be backing the president. And that was a break even from the early days when they had a character who dominated their prime time. His name was Bill O'Reilly. He left after a sexual harassment scandal, but Bill O'Reilly would make a point of bucking Republican orthodoxy sometimes and surprising you on something like gun control. That sort of went away. So opinion took over more, news diminished over time to the point where even some of their top news talent left the network saying that this has become too propagandistic for us.
Fox has faced high-profile challenges before. You mentioned the Bill O'Reilly case, of course, when Ailes was ousted in a sexual harassment scandal of his own, but seems to have always survived. How do you put the current defamation cases that Fox is facing in context with past threats that it has eventually succeeded over?
Well, this is definitely the biggest threat directly to Fox News. Look, its credibility has come under question plenty, and especially in the Trump era and beyond. But here we have Fox being vetted in a courtroom, a place where, on the one hand, public relations don't really matter, but on the other hand, a judge who is going to separate the wheat from the chaff, who's going to say, this doesn't hold up, and I'm not going to consider that. Fox has been very good at managing its image, and it's in a courtroom now where it doesn't control how its image is managed. So that alone is a threat. Of course, the dollar amount that the plaintiffs, in this case Dominion Voting Systems, are seeking is $1.6 billion. And even if Dominion wins, they may only get some of that money, but it's still, at this point, that is a big dollar number, even if they get less than the whole thing. So there are financial implications. There could be lawsuits there from shareholders. So it just could have cascading effects, and I've never seen anything quite like this just for Fox News. I mean, Murdoch himself has weathered some serious scandals, one or two maybe on the order of this, but no company goes looking for scandals, even if they've survived. Even if they think they can survive it, they don't want this.
Your story focuses in part on the landmark New York Times v. Sullivan Supreme Court ruling and how Fox has argued that its opinion and news pieces are covered the same as all other news outlets, that they're reporting on issues of public concern as they see fit, and that's protected by the First Amendment. Do you see any implications for other news outlets based on what Fox is going through at the moment?
Well, on the one hand, what Fox is arguing when they talk to other reporters about this, right, and in their other public statements, what they would say is everybody should really care about this because, there, but for the grace of God, you will have someone, especially for fellow other television networks, that you might have something on your air. Somebody might say something that is incorrect, and you'll be responsible, and you'll get sued, and this could really harm speech. What hasn't happened, though, is a great rallying to their side by what's known in the business as the First Amendment bar. That is, there are a number of attorneys who really care about First Amendment rights. They fight these cases day in and day out. They've dedicated careers to it. And I think that we'll see what happens. Look, this could change if one way or another this makes its way through appeals and up to the Supreme Court. But there's a view, from what I can tell so far, among First Amendment lawyers that what Fox did here in reporting election conspiracies that really this voting company is saying really harmed its reputation, and they have a lot of emails to show that a lot of people at Fox News knew that these allegations weren't true, that's not really what journalists do, right? Journalists vet allegations before they air them. We also do quote politicians who say things, but the trick here for Fox, just this week, the judge ruled that the judge is not going to just decide that some of what Fox was reporting was newsworthy because, for instance, Fox will say that the president was making these allegations. The judge is saying what matters is, did you knowingly put something in front of your millions of viewers that you knew to be false? And that would be an element in the actual malice standard that Times v. Sullivan set.
So that leads me to my next question. What kind of threat do you think places like OAN and Newsmax really pose to Fox in the long run? Well, that's sort of the irony here. During between Election Day of 2020 and the January 6th insurrection, and there was this great fear inside Fox that its new competitors on cable, much smaller, chief among them Newsmax and then secondarily OAN, that they were going to lose their viewers to those two networks, because those two networks, for instance, Newsmax had made a big statement in the days after all the press came together and said, yes, Joe Biden has won this, when Joe Biden was sort of unofficially declared. Newsmax made a point of saying, we are not going along with that determination until we see more reason to feel confident in this election. That kind of stance was drawing viewers away. And we can see in emails that led to almost a panic among key people at the network, most especially some of the opinion hosts. That said, what you see other emails from people within the organization that have been here before. They know that Fox's viewers generally get demoralized when Democrats win elections, when their side loses, and that this would be a blip. And that view was vindicated. Newsmax's ratings were surging in this period. It did appear to be taking viewers away from Fox, but that would be very short-lived. So the key thing, and the reason I'm talking about this at such great length, is because then the hosts who are worried about these rivals started embracing more of the election conspiracy content, which is what walked it into so much trouble. And in the end, that threat did not really prove to be lasting in any way, shape, or form. So you and I are speaking just after a Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump sit-down interview. The Tucker text messages demeaning him notwithstanding, I suppose. What do we know about how Fox plans to approach the current election cycle?
Well, they've sent mixed signals, because what we do know, again, from these emails, but we'd heard it, so this was in the news, that Rupert Murdoch had really soured on Donald Trump for re-election. We also know, and I've reported previously, that Rupert Murdoch was not a fan of Trump's in 2016 initially either. So there was a signal for months over the last year that they're leaning toward DeSantis more, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, that DeSantis was getting much more airtime. Trump was not getting Fox airtime for a long time. But then something changed. And what changed was that Trump showed continued strength in the polls vis-a-vis DeSantis. And voila, now we see Trump on Fox much more. So the big lesson in all of this, for those of us who studied Murdoch, and we kind of knew it, but you see it really in sharp relief here, is that Rupert Murdoch follows his audience. Where his audience goes is where he's going to go. And if his audience is going in a Trump direction, he is not going to play with the ratings of the network by continuing to block Trump from exposure.
Do you think it's fair to say that Rupert Murdoch would prefer a different candidate than Trump this time?
I think that's I consider that objectively true. That it's really out of the realm of supposition. That's been telegraphed from within that company for months. So I still think that there's an email I cite in my piece where it's sort of after the dust is settled following January 6th, where Murdoch is very down on Trump and blames him for riling up that crowd. So he's definitely not a fan, and historically wasn't a fan. But again, he's the more important email involving Rupert Murdoch in this entire case so far is he says in one email to the head of the network, Suzanne Scott, that they have to play a careful balancing act of not alienating Trump, but not taking too seriously some of these conspiracy theories, primarily from Rudy Giuliani, former New York mayor, and at the time Trump's personal lawyer. And when a lawyer in a deposition for Dominion voting systems gets to talk to Murdoch and says, why did you not want to upset Trump or alienate Trump? And Rupert Murdoch says, well, because our viewers are fans of him, so that would be stupid. And so that's sort of the driving instinct of Rupert Murdoch, and, you know, it's being challenged now in court. But the question is, if the whole thing were to repeat itself again, and it could in 2024, where does he go? And if that's his North Star, the ratings and the audience, then you could see a new round of trouble.
Just to wrap up, where does that leave the news side that we began talking about at Fox? I know they've had a number of high-profile departures, and obviously there's a lot of internal pressure on them.
It's almost as if Fox is at a new decision point. The balance of power has so clearly shifted to its opinion side at a time when that opinion side is farther than ever from journalistic standards of verification. It's just not. You see it in the way they handled all these stories in the lead up to January 6th, that the opinion side just wasn't really getting too caught up in the facts. And in fact, the news division was being told, be careful how you handle these fact checks and debunkings. So now does the network try to give its news organization side, the news side, more ballast, more support, more exposure? And they have taken out an ad recently that's getting some ridicule for playing up their straight news journalists. But the question is, if the straight news journalism alienates their audience, it's always curious to me that do they just go more in the opinion direction? But again, that opinion direction has led them into great trouble right now. So maybe they get behind their news division more, but that news division accounts for less programming hours, and maybe they give it more programming hours. Maybe nothing changes. I'm loath to predict anything right now.
Just one more thing, and you alluded to Fox's very sophisticated and hard-nosed PR operation earlier in the conversation. As somebody who regularly covers Fox and the Murdochs, what kind of impacts does that have on you? How do they treat you?
Oh, I've covered them for so long that it's like any press relationship. You fight it out, and the news must get published, and when they don't like it, they don't like it. But I think we have a job to do. I think that's understood there, that we just have to tell the truth based on the facts as we see them. And in this case, again, that's why it's so interesting to watch this as a reporter who's followed them so long, because now we're going to see what a judge makes of arguments about what their coverage did and didn't do. And by the way, I'll note that it's been made clear to me and everyone else covering this that should they lose, they will certainly appeal. and that appeal could go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and I would expect the other side to do the same. So this whole case is going to be in front of us all for quite a bit.
Well, we will continue reading your reporting. Jim Rutenberg's latest New York Times Magazine story is called How Fox Chased Its Audience Down the Rabbit Hole. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Sure,
thanks for having me.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.